As I mentioned at the introduction of Mass, as we gather this evening to celebrate our Eucharist, we come together at the beginning of a new liturgical year and enter into a new liturgical season, this sacred season of Advent. It is almost as if the Church knows intuitively of how we need to be able to have a new start, a fresh beginning at this particular time of the year. We enter into the darkest days of our calendar year. Our lives are often filled with a busyness and a hecticness. And so it is good at the beginning of a new year to be able to take a step back, to be able to renew ourselves, to refresh ourselves. And this is what the sacred season of Advent is all about. It is about that opportunity to welcome once again and for the first time the presence of God anew in our lives. As we think of this sacred season of Advent, we know the word Advent comes from the ancient Latin word that means coming. And as we live these 4 weeks of our church year, we recognize that we celebrate not one, not two, but 3 comings of Christ. During this sacred season, we remember that first coming of Christ, who came long ago as a tiny child, who became human to teach us how to live and how to love and to be able to save all people. We know that Christ will come again at the end of time, not as a tiny child, but as the King of glory. But in between this first and this second coming of Christ, we recognize that Christ comes in the midst of our ordinary, everyday lives, if we have but the eyes and the hearts to be able to see, to recognize, and to welcome him. And so Advent becomes this privileged opportunity for us to be able to welcome him in the midst of our daily lives. This becomes the real challenge and invitation to see if our hearts truly desire to welcome him and to allow him to enter so that he can be Lord of our hearts, of our lives, of all that we are. Throughout this sacred season of Advent, as we will gather to celebrate our Eucharist both on Sundays and weekdays, as we will be hearing of the readings from the Old Testament, they speak to us about the people of Israel and how it is that they had a longing for the coming of God in their midst. And in fact, this is what we hear this evening in our first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah. In many ways, this reading tonight is an anguished call of the prophet Isaiah as he looks about what is happening in his life and in the life of the chosen people. They have been trying to save themselves. They have been trying to rescue themselves in the midst of all that they are living and experiencing. And they recognize that all of their valiant efforts seem to be futile. They have come to recognize that they cannot save themselves. And as a result of that, they are left empty-handed. They are left exhausted and deflated. And so we hear the prophet Isaiah crying out on behalf of the people of Israel. Why, O Lord, do you make us stray from your ways and harden our hearts? Oh, that you would tear open the heaven and come down. Isaiah is crying out for his people whose lives are in ruin and misery, in brokenness and in darkness. And as they come to recognize that they cannot save themselves, they come to see that they have a need for a Messiah, a Savior. And who is that but Yahweh God? And so they cry out to him that he would tear open the heavens and come down to them. And in this cry for God to be their Savior, they recognize that it is God and God alone that can heal them. It is God and God alone that can strengthen them. It is God and God alone that can transform them. That is why at the end of our reading tonight, Isaiah has that beautiful imagery of how God is the potter and they are the clay, and that they are the work of the potter's hands. They recognize that it is only God that can refashion and shape them so that they can reclaim their dignity as being children of God, made in his image and likeness, and able to enter into the covenant relationship with faithfulness and fidelity, mindful that God will be their God and they will be his people. And so the people of Israel long for the coming of that Messiah, that Savior that will liberate them, that will save them, that will give them newness of life. In many ways, this plea of Isaiah reminds me of that beautiful 8th century Benedictine hymn that became such a cherished church song over the years, especially during our Advent season. O come, Emmanuel. This ancient hymn of the church expresses so well not only what the people of Isaiah's time experienced, but also what the people throughout the centuries and us today have experienced. Recall the opening words of the song, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lowly exile until the Son of God appears. Like Isaiah and the people of Israel, these ancient monks also came to recognize their need for Emmanuel, God with us. They also came to recognize how they needed to be ransomed in the midst of the captivity that they experienced. Not a physical captivity, but a spiritual captivity because of their sinfulness, because of their brokenness. And so they too, like Isaiah, cry out, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lowly exile until the Son of God appears. And so, like the ancient people of Israel, like these Benedictine monks, we too recognize that we are in need of a Messiah, that we are in need of a Savior, that we have come to recognize that we cannot save ourselves. We cannot take ourselves out of the brokenness and the darkness and the misery that exists in our world and in our lives. And so this is what this new liturgical season of Advent is all about. It is about recognizing how it is that we need a Savior and how it is that we are called to welcome Emmanuel, not only in our world, but more importantly, in our hearts and in our lives. And this is why at the beginning of this new liturgical year, as we begin reading this year from the Gospel of St. Mark, we hear Jesus speaking how it is that we are called to be able to welcome him, how it is that we are to accept him as the Messiah, as the Savior. We hear Jesus remind the people long ago and still us today of how it is that we need to keep alert, to keep awake. For we recognize how easy it is, like the people of Israel long ago, to become inattentive to the movement and the presence of God in our lives. We recognize, like the people of Israel of long ago, how it can be easy for us to become indifferent to the good news of Jesus Christ. Like the people of Israel long ago, we recognize how we can fall into a laziness and a drowsiness in being joyful disciples of the Lord. And as a result of all of that, we can begin to forget that God is God and we are not. We can begin to forget how it is that we are in need of a Savior to be able to rescue us from the captivity of our sinfulness, our brokenness, our darkness. And so this Advent season, the beginning of this new liturgical year, is an opportunity for each and every one of us to discover and to rediscover our need of a Savior. It is an opportunity for each of us to recognize those areas in our lives in which we are being held captive and how it is that we need to be ransomed so that we can be set free, that we can be molded by the potter to become who he has called us to be. And so how is it that we keep alert and stay awake during this Advent season? I want to suggest to us that there are 3 very practical and tangible spiritual disciplines that you and I can embrace during this sacred season to help us to stay awake and to be alert, to be able to welcome more and more the presence of Christ in our lives, and to be able to recognize our need for a Messiah, a Savior. The first way that we can do this is becoming more and more consistent in our prayer. We recognize that prayer becomes our lifeline to God, that each and every day, as we spend time in quiet prayer before the Lord, it is that opportunity not only for us to open our hearts and our lives to Him, sharing with Him our thoughts, our needs, our desires, but more importantly in our prayer, to be able to take time for sacred silence. For sacred silence is not the absence of God, but in fact, sacred silence is the vocabulary of God, of how God speaks to us, to encourage us, to strengthen us, to affirm us, to mold us, to guide us, to shape us. And so during this sacred season of Advent, we are called to be able to pray more consistently, whether that be in the midst of our daily prayer, to be able to pray more consistently in our celebration of the Eucharist, not only on Sunday, but throughout the week, to be able to be nourished more frequently by Jesus, the bread of life, the source and the summit of our lives, and to be able to recognize, like the people of Israel, of how it is that we need to be healed and forgiven by God, and through the sacrament of reconciliation, we receive the gift of God's pardon and peace. And so the first spiritual discipline during this Advent season to help us to stay awake and keep alert is to be able to pray more consistently. The second spiritual discipline that can help us to be able to enter into this season of Advent and welcoming the many and varied presence of Christ in our midst is to be able to hope persistently. We recognize when we turn on the television or listen to the news that our world is often filled with a sense of darkness, a sense of despair, a sense of tragedy. And this not only often happens in our world, but sadly in the midst of our lives, of our family and friends, and even ourselves. And if we are not attentive to what is happening, if we are not a people of hope, we can easily sink into darkness, into doubt, and into despair. But if we are able to cultivate that virtue of hope, allowing the light of Christ to radiate in the midst of the darkness of our world and our lives, then we have the ability to pick ourselves up and to begin once again. And so we are a people of hope. And as Pope Benedict reminded us in his first encyclical, hope has a name, and his name is Jesus. As we welcome Emmanuel more and more into our hearts and our lives, he dispels the darkness that is there and fills us the radiance of his light. And so during this Advent season, we are called then to allow hope to become more and more a virtue in our lives. And then a final and third spiritual discipline that we can adopt during this Advent season is to be able to serve more generously. We recognize how richly blessed we have been by God, and how if we desire to live his great commandment of loving God and loving neighbor, then we must be able to roll up our sleeves and to be able to reach out to others, whether it be in our family or circle of friends, whether it be in our schools or our places of work, whether it be in our church or a community. But we are called to reach out to one another and to serve without counting the cost. And as we serve one another, we recognize that we are not only serving them, but we are serving Christ himself. And so Advent becomes that opportunity for us to find tangible ways each and every day to be able to serve and to be able to be that witness of the good news of Jesus. And so tonight, as we gather to celebrate our Eucharist, we recognize, like the people of Isaiah's day, like the monks in the 8th century, of how it is that we need to welcome Emmanuel. And throughout these days, these next 4 weeks, as we work on praying consistently, hoping persistently, and serving generously, we can allow then the words of the song, O come, Emmanuel, to penetrate more and more into the depths of our hearts and our lives. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lowly exile here, until the Son of God appears. This Advent, may we come to recognize more and more how it is that we need Emmanuel. This Advent, may we come to recognize how it is that we need to be ransomed from the captivity of our sin, our brokenness. And as we prepare then to welcome the coming of Christ, let us stay awake and alert and know that Emmanuel is with us.